Construction Playbook podcast with Pagabo in partnership with the Open University.
I do unfortunately still feel that there is that tough love, that people are perhaps under an awful lot of pressure from lots of different angles, and how we're treating them is having a real major impact on them and their mental well-being.
Welcome to the Construction Playbook podcast with Pagabo in partnership with the Open University, with me, Gerard Topless, the Group Chief Executive of Pagabo. There are many challenges that face our sector, and today we're going to talk about health and well-being, not just physical health and safety, but also job satisfaction, well-being, and ensuring the construction sector workplace is a good place to be where people can work happily and productively. The Construction Playbook tells us we must rethink how we work and how employers support their workers, but are we doing this? For many people, construction is often seen as a dirty, hard, a tough environment. Our sector has sadly seen a much higher than average male suicide rate. And why is this? Do we do enough to look after our mental health in the workplace? If we don't address all of these issues now, how are we ever going to attract and retain the best people we need to deliver our health, our education, public, housing and infrastructure buildings and projects?
The Construction Playbook podcast with Pagabo.
So today I have with me Richard Coe, Project Director of Kojima, a leading investor, developer and operator of health, education and civic buildings and spaces, and Elizabeth Hardwick-Smith, the Group People and Culture Director at Pick Everard, a leading multidisciplinary consultancy practice in the UK. And Elizabeth also sits on the Pagabo Foundation. So Richard, Elizabeth, let's start with this point. Is our sector as tough a place to work as people believe? And what do we need to address this perception? Richard.
Thanks, Gerard. So delighted to be on the podcast. I started my career in construction, so I guess I can sort of speak from experience. This was in the mid-90s. Interestingly, before I joined the industry, I was told it was very contractual. My first job at Canary Wharf Tube Station wasn't like that at all. It was a real strong team that helped build the tube station. But it was long hours. The construction managers were quite tough on us. As you know, I was a site engineer at the time. I had to work on Saturdays. So I think I probably caught the tail end of probably what could be seen as a sort of a bullying type environment, although it was a very strong management team that sort of pulled us all together. I progressed and got chartered, and you can see that I've moved over onto a sort of a developer role. So, obviously now work with a load of contractors. So maybe that's sort of indicative of, my kind of feelings about construction. And I guess thinking about suicide, unfortunately, it is happening, isn't it? It is a fact. There's a lot of men in the industry. They tend to bottle things up and unfortunately then take drastic action. So yes, it is a problem, and it is absolutely something that we need to do something about.
No, that's a good summary, and it's interesting that you refer to the early part of your career as possibly a bullying culture. That is certainly something we want to try and eliminate.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, Gerard. I actually responded quite well to a very sort of strong, at the end of the day, construction is, can I say it's a bit of a grubby business, isn't it? And I actually responded quite well to being told in no uncertain terms what I had to achieve. But I don't think that is, obviously that is not a tactic really that suits everybody. And as a consequence, behaviours do need to be modified, don't they?
Yeah, and that tough love approach, Elizabeth. In your role particularly, because you're sort of the head of people and culture at Pick Everard. So follow on from Richard there. Did you see that when you first started, and how are you trying to sort of adapt to that at Picks?
Thank you, Gerard. So I've been working within the industry for just over 12 years now. And I do unfortunately still feel that there is that tough love there, that people are perhaps under an awful lot of pressure from lots of different angles, whether that's sort of the long hours culture, or indeed any external pressures through Brexit and the pandemic. And how we're treating them is having a real major impact on them and their mental well-being. So some of the things that I've seen happening has been perhaps an evolution in how we're responding to that, encouraging people to talk up more. I think Richard's right. I think in a male-dominated environment, unfortunately, people still feel that there is a bit of a stigma in talking about these things. There's a reluctance to come forward. So people are reaching a bit more of a crisis point, unfortunately, until they're reaching out for that help. So I think we're driving much more of a stronger conversation. And we're also making sure that there's multiple routes available to people to access support. So I've seen organisations across the industry really pressing for people to reach out to support helplines, more charities popping up to provide advice and signposting people. And also there is a strong call for action to look at job design as well. So not just to sort of respond to some of the stresses that people are having and patch them up and push them back in, but to also start to look at, well, actually, is that environment right? Are people having clarity over their contribution, over their career progression? And do they have enough choice over their working patterns and how they want to get recognised and rewarded as well?
So let's just move that on a little bit, because I'm not so sure we want the industry to be still considered as a very tough place. Yes, there are challenges around the environment. We know that. But health and safety, physical health and safety, has always been addressed very well by our sector. So, Richard, what do you think we need to change to try and deal with some of these points then? Elizabeth has talked about some of the helplines and support services, but that job design piece that Elizabeth mentioned, I thought was quite interesting. So, Richard, in Kojima, are you looking at the training? Are you looking at work processes? Are you looking at the way you build things now? What sort of things are you doing to try and address it?
Can I give an example? And this is quite an interesting example. We're currently building new mental health facilities for South West London and St George's Mental Health Trust. It was a very challenging bid, 82-acre site, many millions in construction value. And one of the things that really helped to win the work and the project, we developed an incredibly strong team ethos. It was so powerful that, for me, sort of leading the bids, I was really lucky that we all pulled in the right direction, and we saw firsthand the service users at Springfield, with severe depression, anxiety, eating disorders, and now that we're actually onto site, I think as a collective team, we followed that through. So it's not only mental health, it's new houses, it's a care home, some retail, a 32-acre park. We were always very nervous about how everyone would work together. So we agreed, and this is a legal document that we're actually working to, a collaboration document. And the whole ethos of the collaboration document or collaboration agreement is for us all to work together and sort of be mindful of each other's operation. All the organisations need to progress. We all need to progress in a safe and hopefully happy environment. I actually think it's been pretty successful. And we're the developer JVs, Kojima and Sir Robert McAlpine, and the JV is called STEP. We chair the collaboration meetings so that there's quite a lot of touch points in terms of how the project's running and how we're all getting on. And, clearly there's construction on many faces, but how can we resolve those issues? And obviously to make it, a successful project for all involved.
Yeah, can I just jump in there, Richard? Because that's, when you say all involved, are you extending that to your supply chains, who actually do an awful lot of the work on our construction sites?
Okay, the collaboration agreement is obviously across the principals. I'm hoping that the behaviour is flown down to the supply chain. And I think we're quite lucky. We enjoy working with Surrey McAlpine, and some of the things that they're doing in terms of the sum of the parts, I think is quite beneficial. So, for example, Fresh Fruit Fridays, they have voucher schemes to reward good health and safety principles and flow through. It's not all been plain sailing. I did try and introduce Paint 360 into the process. I'm sure you've come across them, Gerard. They recycle paint. But what's really good about Paint 360 is they're a social enterprise, and they work with people who find it challenging to get jobs. And one of the difficulties that we found in introducing recycled paint onto the project is it hasn't got the correct certification to go through the BREEAM process. It feels sort of hard to believe, doesn't it? That
it is.
Not only can we use recycled paint, which is a really good idea, we're actually also getting the added benefits of working with people that find work challenging.
Yeah. Let's bring Elizabeth into this, because the Construction Playbook, Elizabeth, that talks about a number of things, and health and well-being is certainly one of them. It also talks about supply chains. So, when you review your processes at Pick Everard's, are you conscious about the Construction Playbook? Do you read it? Do you acknowledge it in what you do? And if so, how?
Yes, absolutely. So, we're very cognizant of the Construction Playbook, and as you say, health, safety, and well-being. It is the top objective amongst the sort of the top three that they've identified as being essential to drive forward. So, going back to the discussion over supply chains, I think ensuring the policy set out in the playbook flow down through the supply chain is absolutely essential to its success. So we as consultants see it very much as part of our role to provide expert advice, not only to our clients, but also to others in the supply chain, so they can understand it and respond to it and to the evolving demands of those key areas for wellbeing. And we've got best practice in place that we could be sharing and helping direct them on. Richard's obviously shared some practices there. There's others that we've got in place, particularly with regards to understanding your data, with regards to wellness and absence and the reasons behind it, and on setting suitable standards, and to keep measuring progress against those suitable standards and ensuring that that is visible. But I think it's only by acting together with others in our supply chain that we can align our efforts, and that change is going to be achieved in this area.
Yeah, the Construction Playbook talks a lot about teamwork in everything we do.
Absolutely.
And this is certainly one area where we can find a good way through. Let's just, obviously, we've lived hopefully through, some people might say we're not through the pandemic yet, but we're certainly, our sector certainly dealt with it better than a lot of sectors. We've been very good as a sector in what we've done. But, working from home is a big thing. I'm looking out from this podcast, and Richard and Liz are both working from home. I'm not, as it happens today, but, is working from home the sole answer? If I'm a bricklayer, it's difficult for me to work from home, clearly. What about people's mental health working alone and at home? So, the pandemic has shown a lot of positives, but, is it the answer to our mental health and well-being? Richard, how do Kojima deal with working from home? What's the policy?
I think we've been through really quite an interesting journey, actually, Gerard. I think it has to be said that prior to the pandemic, there was, probably a bit of a bums on seats mentality. But surprise, surprise, when we all moved to home and started working, productivity went up, which obviously is it's a real positive. I was able to do my job entirely from home, and I feel a little bit guilty in actually saying this, but actually my quality of life, I think, went up through the pandemic. As a family, we're really lucky in terms of where we live, how the house is organised, but I absolutely appreciate that it wasn't the same experience for everybody. Kojima were very good in lots of touch points in terms of phoning each other up for coffee. We can come on to perhaps talk about Moodbeam and how we used technology to help us. And I think now our sort of working practices is very firmly working from home and in the office. We've now got new offices. We're just near Centre Point in London. There's only 30 desks for about 80 of us. It's all hot desks.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm doing a day, 2 days a week. And actually, the difference in working at home, not having to rush for a train and get on the tube and everything that goes with that, to actually then enjoying that hustle and bustle, I think actually, for me, we've got the best of both worlds, actually.
Okay, well, let's just, I agree that blended approach. What I'd be interested in, though, is Elizabeth. Elizabeth's role as the people director.
Yes.
Well, she will be responsible for everybody at Pick Everard, in a sense. So have you seen the downside of working from home and the importance of people still connecting, Liz?
Yes, absolutely. So I think when we all went remote, we were probably all in a little bit of a state of excitement and a state of shock. But it has shown us that it can be a lot more productive. What we then found a few months in was that people are actually starting to get very lonely and feeling isolated, particularly people living on their own. We have found over time that perhaps morale has dipped a little bit and motivation has dropped down for some people. So we've worked very hard right this period to stay connected, launching initiatives such as Call a Colleague, making sure that colleagues are contacting each other on a regular basis, line manager one-to-ones as well as regular broadcasts as well. But also some of the usual stuff that we enjoy from work, such as sort of recognition and celebrating with each other. We very much moved those obviously to a virtual world and made sure that we were still socialising, so regular quizzes, as well as involving our staff in a Christmas broadcast as well. But I must say, one of the biggest areas that we've had to invest in is the mental well-being of our people, and we have had people decline so much more rapidly during this period than any other, because they haven't had those normal routes open to them, unfortunately. You know, everywhere has been overwhelmed. The GP surgeries have been overwhelmed, the helplines have been overwhelmed. So people have been turning to their employers much, much more. So we've got to play our part, very importantly, and much larger than ever before, to ensure everybody is safe and productive.
So just to push it a little bit, we're able to work from home.
Yes.
And in a consultancy business, a lot of the work you do can be sort of managed from home. And in your role, Richard, but I did mention it earlier, you can't, if you're a bricklayer or a plumber, you cannot work from home. So how do we make sure those people are safe? Are we putting them into a dangerous environment? Do we test that their mental strength is there to deal with the fact that they've been sent into site or onto site? Richard?
Yeah, it's interesting, Gerard. At the end of the day, obviously, these are all very skilled people. And what we need to do is to support them in doing their role. So proper welfare facilities, well organised, tidy sites, well managed so that everything works as well as it should. And it's quite nice to start to see now some of the courses and the training that's taking place. So we do now have mental health first aiders. Mm-hmm. I think the stigma of mental health, I think it's improving, but I think there's still an awful lot more to do to work with the workforce so that they do feel part of a team. If we go back to Canary Wharf, I took a number of friends to site on a Saturday afternoon, and actually they were all office workers. And what they really enjoyed is actually being able to touch and feel what was going on. I was actually creating something, and there is an inherent pleasure, in that process. Okay, so you mentioned mental health first aid, and again, I just want to sort of challenge a little bit. I mean, a lot of organisations have mental health first aid qualifications now, but is that the right term for it? Is that what we should be doing, Elizabeth? I mean, I know Pick Everard are very strong in this area, but are we putting a plaster on the problem rather than going to the root of the problem, particularly for people who are having to work on site? What's your view of mental health first aid and how it works?
Yeah, it's interesting. So we have doubled the number of mental health first aiders in the business. We wanted to make sure that there was more sort of points and people that our staff could reach out to, and to do so on a confidential basis. But we meet regularly with them, and they have actually said, we think the name might be putting people off from approaching us. So yes, some of the ideas that we've had is to perhaps call them wellness champions, because as we know, wellbeing is very, very broad. There's all sorts of different reasons as to why somebody might be struggling with their mental well-being, and we want to speak to them with positive intent. So by focusing more on wellness, and by also introducing methods where people can do more self-care, we've actually managed to keep the large majority of our staff feeling very positive and healthy during this period of time, and also responding quickly to those struggling. Now, I feel that there's sort of two key ways in which we need to address mental well-being. The first one is to make sure that there are the right routes for people to access support, whether that's external to the organisation or within PIC Everard itself. But also, as I said earlier, in the job design, and in the experiences that they're having, in the relationships that they've got with people, and the control that they've got over the demand that they're facing. So the items that are actually causing the stress in the first place. And it's interesting, you said earlier about flexibility, and how that's probably very easy for office workers to have that flexibility in place. And that's been enormously helpful for our well-being, providing obviously we're staying in touch with each other and addressing any issues with regards to isolation. But I was interested to read also a project that Timewise have been doing, a trial of flexibility across the industry, where they have looked at flexibility for people working on site, with a goal to giving them more control and input into their working lives to improve their work-life balance and sense of well-being. So there has been some trials made around, talking to people about their preferences, about taking a more collaborative approach to setting shifts across different teams, perhaps, staggered hours, and people taking their breaks at different times, and incorporating an element of hybrid working. Even for those where the roles, aren't 100% office-based. So some of those that, as I say, are not 100% manual, could still be doing an element of time away from site, an element of time at home, or ideas such as accumulating hours for extra time worked and giving that time back in another month. So I think there are efforts being made. I think it's in its infancy, but there's some good ideas there, which I think it would be great to see that tested by others in the industry.
Yeah. What you just said there sort of teed up my next point, really, which is, if you're going to be able to do that sequencing, and if you're going to be able to design the job and look at the whole job, and not just the individual, but the sort of macro piece, it does lend itself to having data and information.
It does.
Knowledge about your business and your sector. And the Construction Playbook has a strong innovation and digital theme running through it alongside everything else. And we must remember, the Playbook was actually conceived and released effectively in the midst of the pandemic. It was released in December last year. So let's just move it on. You mentioned Moodbeam, and I know both organisations have used Moodbeam, but let's talk a little bit about the role of technology. Is technology going to really help in this, I want to use the word battle against, poor well-being for some people? Do we feel that technology can help us with this, Richard?
I absolutely do, Gerard. And, I've got you and Pagabo to thank for introducing us to Moodbeam.
Do you want to tell us what Moodbeam is then, Richard? Do you want to tell our listeners what Moodbeam is?
Yeah, so it's when we did the trial, 20 volunteers from across the different departments at Kojima, so HR, finance and development, we all wore a Moodbeam band. It's very much like a Fitbit, and it's very simple to use. It's got a yellow button for I'm feeling okay and a blue button for I'm not feeling okay. And I encouraged all of the team to set alarms through the day to basically test how they were feeling, how they were getting on, with all of the results feeding back to a dashboard so that I could monitor how the team, were progressing week by week. Personally, I found it particularly effective in monitoring my steps, sleep, and the amount of positive and maybe not so positive presses. So the combination of all of the data that was recorded. And if the truth be told, and sorry for my boss for saying this, but if I was being given a hard time, I might be pressing the blue button repeatedly. But it's remarkable how effective it was in that process.
All I was going to say was that's a great example of technology, isn't it? Supporting the individual and helping the organisation understand what challenges the individuals are having. And
well, it was really interesting, Gerard, that a lot of colleagues I work with, they look as if they're handling their job with ease. The reality, though, I think is actually very different. Probably we've all got our work persona in place, haven't we? And when you start to use technology to this sort of advantage, it starts to unravel maybe some of the challenges that people are facing. So, for example, staff at Kojima having to work at home with managing young families. One staff member had a really bad week, and I got in touch, and they'd had their wisdom teeth out. And then other challenges, financial reporting was due. So it was really interesting that actually the finance team really felt under pressure when kind of heavy deadlines were on them. And, you'd go for 3 or 4 days of 100%, not so good presses. So really quite illuminating.
Yeah. So, technology, I also know that Pick Everard used Moodbeam. But, it's a great summary that Richard has given us there, Elizabeth. But, in your role, you've got a wide role. You've been in the business 12 years. Are you exploring other technologies? And if so, how are you doing that at PICS?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we believe in self-service as much as possible and sort of self-care in the area of well-being. There's obviously lots of other tools and support around people, but educating people around the signs in themselves and in others, I think is really important for being able to understand, whether you need to reach out for help. And at the moment, we're using our People Hub to advise and inform people around those signs and the types of support available to them. So this is a new hub that we've developed ourselves, which people can access anytime. We've developed wellbeing toolkits, providing information around stress, around depression and other aspects of mental health. We are considering wellbeing apps as well. So we recognise that, when people are out and about or at weekends, they perhaps don't want to be logging onto the hub. So are there other ways in which we can make such information more accessible to them, or indeed information available from other organisations as well? But we did really enjoy trialling Moodbeam 1. I think we probably had similar results to Richard. What we did with ours was that we had HR people specifically assigned a group of people to observe, and we tracked their moods, and we were able to have real-time conversations with them. So I think any technology that's going to enable those real-time conversations and understanding our people better is absolutely fantastic. But also, as we say, the data and the insights really critical as well. So we're looking at projects now to determine how can we get a better understanding of our absence rates and why people are off and what the patterns are, and making sure that we respond to that through suitable action plans.
Yeah, it's another good point there. I guess our listeners are going to be thinking, that's great. We're taking notice of our team players, of our employees, but are the big bosses actually doing it because they think it's the right thing, or are they wanting to actually address it? So what's your position at PICS on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have in place a business plan, and one of the end goals of that business plan is to have the highest levels of health and well-being throughout the organisation. And what we're looking to do is to create a fantastic employee experience and to ensure that people feel inspired in their careers. So the senior teams have developed a people strategy that addresses those areas, that looks at people's personal growth, not just the technical training, but do have the soft skills necessary to succeed in this industry, working on these very, very challenging projects. Am I getting the recognition that I need, and have I got the right choice over the lifestyle benefits that I wish to have? And is the organisation supporting me to manage my well-being better? So within that people strategy, we are constantly introducing new initiatives, and I have in place a number of staff forums where I'm listening to the people on a regular basis on a number of areas. I'm taking on board their feedback and I'm reporting back to the leadership team on progress. So in Pick Everard, we are regularly looking at wellbeing. It's regularly on the agenda and we're frequently discussing what we can do to address it. It's a big beast to move, isn't it? Wellbeing in the industry is a big beast to move. But I do believe more and more senior teams are taking it seriously. I think the conversation's getting bigger. I think that's a great starting point. But I do believe also that next urgent step is thinking about workable solutions and moving those forward with much more urgency.
Okay. Richard, just following on from Elizabeth, do you think the big bosses are taking it, are dealing with it as they should?
At Kojima, we've got a green and wellbeing team, and that's been operational for some time now. And I think it's doing some really good work, actually, in terms of a whole variety of initiatives, drinking water in the office, fresh fruit. But I think, we're trying to challenge ourselves to keep reassessing whether we're doing enough. And this is a subject sort of dear to your heart, Gerard, is we're really pushing hard to reinvigorate our social value perspective and how everything that we do kind of takes on board social value, health and well-being as an inherent way of how we do business. And I guess one thing that is quite lucky with us is our Japanese heritage. And my Japanese colleagues actually do bring, quite a nice karma, actually, if I can say it like that, to the business. That said, I've just started bidding Velindra Cancer Centre, and it's a massive project and there is so much to do. I'm going to need a holiday at some point for sure.
Okay. So look, that's been a fantastic sort of conversation we've had today from Richard and Elizabeth. And, our one little plug I'm going to do, it's the Pagabo Foundation, really, that Elizabeth joined and the board about a year ago, I guess.
Yes, that's right.
That. And that's supporting, particularly around mental health. That's the work we're doing. So that's an unashamed plug there for our foundation. But before I let you both go, I'm just going to ask you just one final question. What is your top tip that you think our listeners need to consider if or whether they are a client or a user or a supplier in the Construction Playbook? What do you think is the top tip on health and well-being they need to think about? So I'll start with you, Elizabeth.
I think they need to know their starting point very well on health, safety and well-being. And that for me involves gathering the data, talking to your people, assessing your staff wellness and productivity and responding to it as quickly as you can.
That's a great point. If you don't know where you're starting, how do you know where you can go?
Exactly.
That's a really good point, Elizabeth. Richard, what's your top tip?
Well, clients, my top tip is that I think you need to incentivise the teams that are delivering your projects from a health and safety and wellbeing perspective by progressing monthly or quarterly awards whereby the best health and safety performance of a subcontractor could win £500, say. And I think that would be a very positive way of capturing people's attention.
So incentivisation. And you did speak directly to the clients there, I noticed, Richard, as well. So that's an interesting point. But yeah, look, they're both very good points. If you don't know where you're starting, how do you know where you're going? And if everybody is delivering what the clients want, what you're saying there is a bit of recognition from the clients in a tangible format, which I think is they're both very, very valid points. So look, I want to say thank you very much to both Richard and Elizabeth today. Richard Coe from Kojima and Elizabeth Hardwick-Smith from Pick Everard. They've been fantastic guests, and thank you everybody for listening to our podcast on health and wellbeing. And hopefully we've given you something to think about and take back into your organisations, and hopefully you can help your organisations improve the health and wellbeing. Thank you very much.